Hi, Shane here. You're watching Sam for God, and this is Mark. Check her out.
So hi guys, how are you doing? I recently went to the Playhouse Theatre in London to see a play called 1984, which you may be familiar with because it's based on a very famous classic, 1984 by George Orwell. Now I actually read the book for the first time last year, it was around this time last year actually. I mean, I'd always kind of known what it was about, but actually reading the book gives you a completely new experience because there's so much in the book that it just really grabs you. And I remember reading it last year, I found it very hard to read and I felt almost depressed whilst reading it. Like, it just gave me this feeling of sadness and hopelessness and anger in such a way that I've never felt whilst reading any other book before. But I really like the book overall because it's very interesting and fascinating, and because of that, when I heard that 1984 was adapted on stage and it was coming to the West End, I was very excited and I really wanted to go and see it. I'm going to be honest, I also had my doubts because the book, if you've read it, you'd know it's very difficult, I think. As a whole, even the book, a lot of it has to do with thoughts that our main character has in the book, and to try and show those thoughts on a stage is quite difficult in my opinion, so I was a bit apprehensive about it. But I'd heard some great reviews about the show, so I went along, and yeah, I thought it was a pretty decent adaptation of the book. Now, if you don't know anything about 1984, which I doubt it because I think most people know at least a bit about what it's about, Big Brother, the reality TV show, is actually sort of based on 1984, the book. And it's basically a political book about a dystopian world in which everything you do is controlled like it is in Big Brother. It's a completely totalitarian government where the government literally tries to control every single thing you do, every single thing you think of. Basically, you have no control over what you do. Everything you do is just controlled by the government, which I think is very scary. And that's why I felt very kind of angry and sad when I read the book. The main character in this book is a guy called Winston, and he starts to have these thoughts that are kind of against the government. They call them thought crimes in the book. And obviously he knows that what he's thinking is wrong because nobody else thinks like that, and he's also scared about these thoughts that he's having because he knows that if the government finds out, they can kill him, they can do anything they want with him. So he starts to write them down because he kind of has a feeling that maybe there might be other people out there that might feel the same as him, or perhaps even just for himself, because he wants to make sure that he's not just going crazy, that he actually does think these crazy kind of things that are completely against what the government believes in. Basically, Winston's character starts thinking in a way in which the government doesn't want him to. Winston knows in his heart that what's happening in his world and his country and stuff isn't right, but obviously the government don't want him to think that. The government want everybody to think that everything's perfect and they want everybody to worship the Big Brother and stuff. So yeah, it's very interesting, but Winston gradually meets two other important characters in the show. One of them is a girl called Julia, and Julia also has the same feelings that Winston has about kind of rising up to the government and feeling angry about the fact that they're being controlled like this, and kind of being a bit more intelligent, I suppose, than the rest of the people in this country, fictional country or whatever. It's called Oceania or something, I think, in the book. Sex, for instance, sex or pleasure anyway, is completely against the government's rules. Nobody does it, like most people just don't do it because in a really weird way they've been programmed not to do it. Whereas Julia is a character that wants to kind of have sex with people just in a way of standing up against the government because she likes it and she wants to show that she doesn't care, that she'll just have it if she wants to. So obviously Winston and Julia kind of fall in love, I guess. And then also there's another character in the show called O'Brien. Now Winston gradually finds out there's a whole secret group of people who feel the same way as him and want to stand up to the government and try and defeat the government basically. And I think the leader of them somehow is O'Brien. Julia and Winston go to him and he gives them some kind of conditions about joining the Brotherhood. He asks them what they're prepared to give up to be a part of this. And Winston basically says that he's prepared to give up anything in his life, even his own life, but he's not prepared to give up spending time with Julia. So that's very sweet, but obviously as the show goes on, things might change, and that's all I'm going to say. The plot honestly is very interesting, and I suggest that if you haven't seen the show or read the book, definitely read the book first if you're going to go and see the show, because there's so much more in the book that you don't get in the show. I mean, don't get me wrong, I thought the show was actually very faithful to the book. It felt very similar to the book. I mean, the feelings I got whilst watching the show were quite similar to the feelings I got whilst reading the book. Except when I read the book, my feelings were a lot more exaggerated and a lot more strong because there's so much more in the book that kind of you just don't get in the show, and because of that I think maybe in a way the show wasn't even a good idea, maybe. I don't know, I mean, I went with a friend who hadn't read the book before and she didn't really know anything about 1984, and I don't think she really enjoyed it much, and I think that's because the show just doesn't really work on stage. Like the first 15 to 20 minutes of it is basically Winston and a bunch of other people, like his neighbours and stuff, discussing the world that they're in, discussing things about this kind of dystopian place that if you're not familiar with the book, you'd find completely confusing. And because that's how the show starts, it's just a very slow start, I think, for people who haven't read the book. I mean, I personally found it quite interesting. Like, I was just watching it to compare it with the book. Like, all I kept doing whilst I was watching the show was comparing comparing it to the book. So for that reason, I think I found it quite enjoyable, just because it was interesting to find out how they did it on stage and stuff. But I definitely wouldn't recommend the show to anybody who hasn't read the book. I just don't think that you'll get to appreciate it as much as you'd appreciate reading the book. But having said that, I thought it was a pretty good production and it has some really good elements about it. For instance, I thought the sets were really good. They were very generic sets, and the costumes as well. They couldn't really tell what decade they were from. They were very everyday and kind of not specific, and I like that because it kind of means that it can be relatable to any time and any place, and that's what I get from the book as well when I read it. Quite a few of the scenes are done on film, and there's a video in the background that you watch, because it would have just been too difficult and complicated to have actual scenes for some of the scenes because there's just too much going on. And at first I thought, wow, this is a very lazy way of doing it, because I mean, videoing something, you're paying to go and see a play on stage and you're watching a video instead. But as the show went on, I actually thought it was a very clever thing to do, and I liked it. I thought it actually made sense, because it's not like you're just randomly watching a video. The video parts are actually part of the set, so whenever Winston and Julia went into like a certain room or a certain house, they would like go inside this place, and then all of a sudden you'd have like the screen come on and you'd watch a video instead. The screen was always there as well, and I thought it was used very effectively, especially in the first few scenes. I loved it, basically. In the end, I thought it was a very good idea. The video designer was a guy called Tim Reed, and yeah, like I said, I thought it was done very well. The main set as well, Winston's house, when you're first introduced to him, I thought was done very well. There's loads of like files and books everywhere that makes it look very kind of creepy, and I don't know, I just thought that it was the right kind of atmosphere for the whole show, and the book, obviously, like I read it. Now the cast for this I thought was very good as well. Winston himself, I'm going to be honest, in my mind when I read the book last year, I imagined him to be slightly older than what he was in the show. In the show I think the guy is about maybe in his 30s or something, but in my mind I always thought Winston to be somewhere in his like late 40s. But that didn't take away anything from the guy's performance. Winston was played by a guy called Sam Crane, and I thought he was pretty perfect for the part. Like, you really believed his fear and intelligence in a way, and the fact that he just genuinely believed in what he was thinking and feeling and how he wanted to really change the government. I loved him, and you really do root for him in the show, just as you do in the book as well. Julia was played by a girl called Hara Yanis. I thought she was great as well. She captured Julia's character perfectly, and I really believed her, and also her chemistry with Winston. Then you've got O'Brien, who was played by Tim Dutton. Again, he was pretty much how I imagined him in my head when I read the book. Very kind of intriguing and secretive in some ways, and especially in the last few scenes I thought he was incredible. Now this show is pretty sad, like I said, and it does contain some scenes that are pretty gruesome to watch. I thought they did a pretty good job of showing those last few scenes. Without giving too much away, they're very hard scenes to watch, and they were very hard pages for me to read as well when I read the book. So because of that, I think that this play is probably for people above the age of, I don't know, 14, 15. I think people under that age probably wouldn't even care about it because it's very political, and yeah, they'd probably find it boring. But yeah, overall I thought it was a pretty decent adaptation. I didn't like it, but then I didn't really like the book either. Well, that's probably a lie. I liked the book because I thought it was incredibly like mind-blowing, but I didn't enjoy the experience of reading it because it was just so hard to read and so sad, and I don't know. As a play though, I just don't think it works as well as it does in the book. But I do admire the creative team for making this, and I think, like I said, for what it is, it's pretty good, and I loved seeing it live on stage for the first time. But again, I'm going to say that if you haven't read the book and if you're just not interested in 1984, then you're not going to enjoy the play, in my opinion. So yeah, by all means go and see this show if you're interested in 1984 and just want to see it on stage. And if you have seen it or are planning to see it, do leave comments and let me know what you've thought of the show. Also, one thing that I liked about this was that I actually bought a ticket for £19.84, which I thought was pretty cool considering the name is 1984. So apparently they did quite a lot of tickets actually for that price, and yeah, that's a pretty good price actually for a play, so if you want, just go there and try and get those kind of cheap tickets. But yeah, that's my opinion on 1984. As always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!